Good morning, everyone. My name, excuse me, post-Fancy, I have no voice. My name is Ashley Koff. I'm a registered dietitian and CEO of the Better Nutrition Program. Thank you so much for joining today. Your time is super valuable and we value it. So we want to be as efficient and effective as possible. So if you are joining us live and you have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the questions section. And I will be reviewing the questions as we go along. If there's a way to address your question in the moment, I will do that. And if not, we will go ahead and address your question at the end in the Q&A. I also, if there's any issues with sound or anything else like that, please feel free to use the chat box and we will review any content in there as we're going through. One of the things that can often happen is if you have sound issues or something's popping up for you, don't worry. A lot of times things will go in and out on your end, especially if you're on a phone or something like that. I'm sure many of you are seasoned in terms of webinar users, and you know that, but we will be sending you the recording afterwards. So even if you have difficulty or if something pops up and you have to jump off, do not worry about that part at all. For those of you that are watching at a time that is better for you, I also want to offer that you can go ahead and send me any questions directly. You can respond. The best email is team@thebetternutritionprogram.com. We will address your emails and your questions there, and then also get them over to our expert. We're going to do things a little bit differently in true form of Mercury retrograde and some other things that are happening. We've got our expert is joining us, but just a little bit has some things going on. So we are going to jump in. I'm going to talk a little bit about why we're here today, what we're doing, and then you will get to meet our expert. So let me start off with this. So our goals today are, well, as I said, we're going to introduce you to Becca McConville, our Better Nutrition expert, in a little bit. But I also want to start off with just the definition of Better Nutrition expert. For those of you who have attended our weekly or sometimes bi-weekly interviews over on Facebook or have watched them on YouTube, I always start off with an introduction of who you're hearing from, but why I'm using this term Better Nutrition expert. I think that's really important for us, especially today as we dive into who we're getting information from, but also who are you. So I think that there are a lot of places, we know there are a lot of places people are getting information in, but one of the greatest challenges today is that people don't know if the information, sorry, we're jumping ahead there, if the information is coming from somebody that can help them apply it in their day-to-day. And that is certainly not the case with a lot of what we see on social media, but what we hear about on TV and in magazines and things like that. And so in order to get more specific information and really help people understand who they should be turning to, like you, people like yourselves that are joining us today, I use the term Better Nutrition expert to mean somebody that is both practice-based and evidence-based. So in terms of the practice-based side of things, that's going to be absolutely critical in the application process of the information that we learn from science, because science is really just one very big part of what informs the decisions and the recommendations that we make. And there's no place that I think we see that more clearly than in the place of athletes. So one of the reasons we're here today is that we have working with Becca McConville, so I will pop over here to her introduction, and also through connecting with several of you, and also depending on when you're watching this, I just want to remind you either to look on YouTube or to join us live next week. We have a live discussion with Heidi Skolnick, another incredible dietitian in this space. And what we wanted to do was talk to Better Nutrition experts about understanding how we can help athletes make better nutrition recommendations from a performance standpoint, both in their sport as well as in their lives and in throughout whatever life stage you're meeting them at. So if you're meeting a student athlete in the early years, or if you're parenting one, or if it's somebody who was an athlete earlier in their life and now you're dealing with them on issues of bone density, or maybe you're dealing with them on, issues and you are learning that they historically had injuries, or maybe it's somebody who is deciding to train for something at a later point in life, but they also wake up and go to their job every day of the week, and they also come home at night and deal with family and kids or party, like any of this stuff. So we want to really be able to help identify how to address all of this. And so we turned to Becca one of the things that really impressed me in an early interview with her was just the amount of information that we need to be assessing in order to make better nutrition recommendations, total nutrition recommendations for the athlete. So Becca, as I mentioned, will be joining us in a bit. That is my hope. And then I want to pop back over here. So what we wanted to start off with is why the Better Nutrition Athlete Evaluation. As somebody who has spent the last 4 to 5 years in development of assessment tools for practitioners, the Better Nutrition program develops in particular and was founded on figuring out ways to efficiently and effectively assess total nutrition. And why do we do that? Because total nutrition at the end of the day is going to be what is affecting our health, right? It's not going to be just one piece. It's not going to be just, asking questions about an understanding if somebody's taking supplements, or it's not going to be just understanding what somebody had to eat, and even if their macros are correct for them. And it's also not going to be just about what's going in and on the body when we talk about total nutrition. We're also going to need to understand what else is going on in their life so that we can make better choice. We can help them make the better choices that work. So if somebody is not cooking and they're eating out, we need to understand how to make those choices. And then if somebody is making choices, if somebody has food tolerances or they're avoiding things, or they for religious reasons, we need to understand all of those pieces. So in that regard, what we started looking at, going from the Better Nutrition assessment tools into specifically the athlete, was that we realized that the athlete, both for their performance, as I was just talking about, but also in their performance in the day-to-day, we really needed to understand what does their body need for all of that. And figuring out needs, as I've interviewed Becca and was talking to her a great deal, and now I've had the privilege of sitting in on a couple of consults that she's done, is really understanding that today we want to take a look and a deeper dive into macros. But as you all know, it's not just at macros that apply for each individual, right? This woman, this guy, a 13-year-old girl who hasn't gotten her period yet, a 14-year-old girl who's had her period for 4 years, like there are so many differences. And then there are also differences based on what type of sport they're doing. And then we also know that we don't want to just look at how much are you taking in a day, but also how are they spacing it throughout the day so that the body is consistently getting fueled and getting what it needs, and also not overwhelming digestion. So as we go through the Better Nutrition Athlete Evaluation today, and I'm going to do my best, as I said, huge apologies. Oh, great, we have Becca. So I'm going to invite Becca to make sure, there we go. I was starting to talk and then I wanted to make sure that she's in. Becca, if you want to go ahead, I'll pop back over here if you want to say hello. Let's go ahead and make sure that you are in here. Oh, you know what, Becca, I think you logged in as a you logged in as a attendee, not as a under your staff link, your webinar link. So we need to just have you go back to the one. Let me just see. I'm going to make you a panelist. Let's see if we can do that. Okay, great. All right, Becca, if you can say hello, I think we're good.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Awesome, we can hear you. And just to give you, I'm so glad, I'm sorry that things were a little kerfuffle today, but we're so glad to have you here. So just as backup to, I've introduced the topic, and I know you can't see it right now, or you may be able to, but we're looking at your beautiful mugshot and a picture of your book. And I was just describing, I kind of introduced you, you wear a gazillion hats, but as practitioner, athlete, and author. And so we've got an image of your book. So Becca, I thought what would be great is if you could give us a little bit of introduction just about yourself and how you got into working with athletes. Let's start there.
Great. Well, first off, my apologies. For some reason, it decided to do an update and then it froze me out of there. So that's why you tried to get on earlier. So I'm sorry for the wait. So You know, it's really interesting. Like many dietitians, the journey that gets us there hadn't been a former athlete, but then kind of stepped into the clinical role. It was really interesting learning about that relationship around food, the science around sport, and then putting that together, which eventually led me to kind of this dual specialization around eating disorders and athletes. And so that's where I saw a lot of individuals with relative energy deficiency in sport. They would come in just not quite attaining their goals, or honestly, I'd see a lot, and we'll talk about that in a case study, for individuals that may be struggling with weight gain, and then you'd find that they were underfueled. And so it prompted me to really kind of break this down in a very simplistic manner, explaining how if you're not matching what you're doing nutritionally with your goals, you kind of miss your sweet spot and end up declining in performance. And so honestly, it actually started with just a blog, and a blog that I kept going and going, and then thought, maybe I could write a book on that. So never turn down any ideas that you think could become books. So
that's amazing. And one of the things I think that I'm really excited to talk about, and we'll move into the assessment and that whole notion of making it efficient, and on that part, is what I really love with your background in the disordered eating side of things is also just not asking questions in a way that's judgmental. So one of the things that we do with our better nutrition assessment tools overall, and I had to engage an expert because, as it turns out, I ask very biased leading questions, and probably have in my career. But I always try to work on that. And so one of the things that I'm particularly impressed with here is just really being able to ask things, and I've seen you apply them in practice in a way that is just about, in this no judgment way, which is about let's ask the whole breadth of questions, and then let's be able to assess based on the information that is revealed. So I really appreciate that. So I thought where we would start off with in the evaluation, I've sort of broken the evaluation as we talk about it into 3 sections today, really understanding how we assess what their body actually needs. And then we're going to talk a bit about what their body is actually telling us based on some of those assessment questions. And then we'll have a conversation about supplements. So kind of how do you figure out what the right form is, and what information do you need to know about how they're taking nutrients in. And then, as Becca mentioned here, we'll talk a little bit on a case study front, and then move into your questions. So, all right, here we go. So Becca, I have the first page of the assessment up, and I was starting to talk about how one of the things that you had really honed in for me in the development here was how important it is to not just ask about calories, to break it out into macros per day, but also to do that in association with what kind of athlete somebody is. And then you ask some questions about their goals and who created or is aware of their goals. So take us a little bit through the thought process and the development of that, and how that helps you get more clarity around what the individual's body needs.
Sure. So I believe it was almost 10 years ago, the USOC and then the Academy and all the allied professionals that support them started to look at, when we do percents off caloric needs, that we have gymnasts having the same type of plate as a lineman on the football team or an endurance runner, and that we know that the energy systems have different requirements. So from there, what they decided to do, and you'll see it changes the weight into kilograms, was really focusing on how much energy they need per their body weight. And then from their sport, is it more aerobic? Is it anaerobic? Is it strength-based? Is it also adding in, like, if they have any needs, like they're an adolescent, they're still actively growing, we have to make sure that we assess for that. And then we go in and break it down according to how much carbohydrates are typically needed, how much protein's needed, and how much fats are needed. And so that really gives them that individualized plate that they can go off of, and it matches according to what their sport needed. One of the reasons, and I apologize, I cannot turn that phone off, that's my husband's work phone. One of the things that's really key is our athletes are just as susceptible to societal messages. So many times they have read a fad diet. Keto right now is really popular, and in some particular areas and conditions it's been researched and showed a benefit, but for others it hasn't. So I always want to know, like, what specifically are you trying to improve and who told you to do that? So I'll have maybe I'm gonna pick on the runners for a second. I'll have a runner that will come in and they'll maybe say, you know, I feel like if I got leaner, I can run faster. And then lo and behold, Galen Roop, who was a really well known and respected, he was one of the only Americans to qualify for the 10K and the marathon. And he had performed really well, but he decided that he wanted to try to mimic the training model and the diet that most of the Kenyans ran, because they're very consistent performers in endurance events. Didn't really run this by his coach, went ahead and started to do it. And then his times got slower. So when his coach addressed it, he was like, what have you been doing that all of a sudden now you're not performing as well, you're not as recovering as much as you should? And when he told his coach, he was like, look, like, this is not working for you. You let me help kind of set your goals, and then we'll go from there. So that's why I have that finding out who has helped them set that performance goal, and then we go from there, because ultimately the coach is like your healthcare provider, your dietitian. You want to work together with them. And then sometimes, though, we may have to put a barrier if that coach is trying to encourage some unhealthy goals, and be able to educate that athlete, and maybe in some certain situations educate the coach directly.
That's awesome. And one of the things that we'll get to at the end is we have two different forms of this evaluation. The patient version actually has recommendations. So when you see the answers to this, you'll see the recommendations. Now, many of you are incredibly experienced in this area. I always learn, like, so it can always be great. You know, I learned a lot actually, because I'm not super experienced in this area, but it can be great to read through the recommendations. But for practitioners, we also have the practitioner version, which doesn't provide those recommendations and has an editable notes section. And I'll be sharing that at the end. But one of the things that Becca was bringing up that I think is just such an incredible opportunity for you and your business space, whether you're established in this space or you're looking to have more of those conversations, is being able to have a collaboration with the coach and the parent coach around the student athlete in particular, or as you move into the professional space. And is really important, but there may be, as you said, there may be some rubs with what they're mentioning, or they may feel uninformed. And so you're able to actually use this as a tool. You're also able to use this as a tool for using it with your other practitioners. So sending this over to their doctor, or sending this, you know, along, having this in their file in case there's an injury or those pieces, that's going to be really helpful. So the second area that we wanted to move into is, what is their body trying to tell you? And I think this is just such an unbelievably important space in total nutrition overall, but I'm fascinated by it in the athletic space because I think that so many of these signals are often not looked at, or not looked at in totality. And then also, as practitioners, we may know we want to ask all of this, but whether it's our patient being uncomfortable or stressed out or not having time, or you can also use this as an intake form before you see your patient, and then you're able to have a roadmap, you know, moving into your section. As I mentioned when we got started, I had the opportunity to shadow Becca with a patient, and you know, she just, like, in a super conversational, it was a young student, like super conversational ways, just, you know, after, you know, be able to ask all these questions and kind of going through. But it also just is super, so you can go that way, but also you want to make sure you're getting all of these answers. And I know for me, when I'm asking, or if I'm working with an athlete where I have less experience than she does, I'm going to be able to rely on this tool to be able to ask these questions. So Becca, we have the current health, the page about current health. So we're talking about digestion, urine, prescription medication, menstruation, sleep, stress, history of anything heart disease related, and then an injury history. And then we have a series of labs. So why don't you walk through sort of why it's so, I think there's no debate for us that we need to know all of these things, but if you can walk through and highlight some of what these things will tell you and how they help you go down a path towards better recommendations.
Sure. Like many in our culture, I think that we've lost that intuition, meaning that we don't understand that when our digestive system starts to get out of whack, or if we're having more headaches, we're having sleep disturbances, that it all could be tied into one big self-care cycle. And so I use that a lot with athletes. First, just kind of telling like, is anything changed with your digestion? Are you using the restroom as you normally would? Have you? And then I try to see if it's aligned with anything that they've changed with their nutrition or training, and then we kind of use that as a way to segue into puzzle pieces. But I want to read, it was interesting, somebody, a physical therapist that I work a lot with, had tagged me in an Instagram post, and this was off a comment about sleep, and he had underlined, he said, when participants were asked about their subjective sense of how impaired they were, and it keeps going off, they consistently underestimated their degree of performance disability. So I think when these start to go off kilter, we lose track of how much, what could have contributed to it. And that's where this really gets down to the basics of their health, which ultimately is going to impact their performance. So then even looking at their urine color, when do they start to notice changes? When I work with, my younger athletes, they usually start to think about hydration needs when it gets around practice, but they don't realize that it's vitally important that they hydrate throughout the whole entire day. So we talk about goals that are there. Are they taking any prescription medications? And then asking them kind of why, getting some details there. Does it interfere? For example, if I have an individual that may be on an ADHD medication and they tend to lose their appetite during the day, we talk about strategies, because that signal is going to be muted at that time. Does not mean that we don't get our nutrition in. We just are more strategic about it and go ahead and plan that out. For my females, then we start looking at the menstrual cycle, which I love how they're now kind of calling that the fifth vital sign, and then providing that education on why that's so important to really debunk if anybody's ever told them like, oh, well, you're an athlete, that's why you shouldn't have your period, why that supports our bone health, that supports our heart health, and then giving them some resources to track if they need to during season, because sometimes, they get busy and they really don't know if they've missed last cycle, they can't remember, or if it's starting to get lighter. Sleep, especially as they get busier into their seasons, are they still sleeping as much? Some positives that come with like the technology and apps is I like to show them the big picture. So for example, and Ashley, is it okay to kind of tie in some case studies as they go along with this?
It's brilliant, so thank you.
Okay. I had a individual that just finished Kona Ironman, and basically the last couple seasons, every time he'd get ready for these big races, he wouldn't be able to peak in his training the way he wanted to, because he would usually get sick, he'd get run down, which then he wouldn't be able to do the level of training that he wanted. And so from his app, I showed him like, okay, notice these trends. Your heart rate starts to elevate for a few days in the morning. Then your sleep starts to lessen by 1 to 2 hours. So we're not talking significant, we're talking 1 to 2. Then all of a sudden you're unable to get in the calories that you need, because when you're dealing with somebody that's doing like an Ironman, we're talking like 5,000 to 7,000 calories some days for their training needs. And then he was able to see like each time he had that trend, it led to poorer outputs in his training. He got sick often, and then he usually would then hit a slump. Being very strategic, no more than 2 days of that pattern being established, that he tries to readdress that, was really instrumental in him being able to, for the first time, arrive at a big race like that, actually healthy and strong beforehand. So teaching them the importance about sleep. Then that ties in like, what is their level of perceived stress? So with school, with their work, and having them rate that, because sometimes for one person, what they would label are 2 or 3, they can handle it better. For others, that's going to take that physical or that stress on them, and looking at how that ties into their nutritional status. And then obviously We want to, by heart, look at our MNT. So we want to see if anybody has any history of heart attacks, heart disease, things that would increase inflammation, so that we can maybe optimize that with our nutritional plan. And then injury prevention. So have they been injured? How, when were they injured? How long were they injured? So looking at how quick they recover. That's been another sneaky source of red S, is usually you'll see them have prolonged recovery times. And it could be that they tend to underfuel during that time, or it could be that that's a result of the underfueling. So I always like to explore that a little bit more. From there, then we start to look at, typically have these labs been within normal range. Now, some of these have to be specifically asked for. So like CRP, that wouldn't be one that they would go into a primary care doc, but if we could give it to them ahead of time. So looking at those inflammatory markers. Vitamin D, was actually just reading an article on bone health in athletes, and the statistics showed that 65% of Division I athletes have been in insufficient levels of vitamin D. So not deficient, but insufficient. But that's pretty astounding. So having them, I have them do a summer read and I have them do a winter read. So then we can also see if we need to adjust the dosage accordingly. For any of my athletes that are vegetarian or vegan, trying to get B12 or folate twice a year, and then looking at some of these other specific, especially linked to heart disease. And that helps too, because what we found, if you remember a couple of years back, there was the controversy with the cardiologist, Dr. O'Keefe, bringing up running. But what most people missed in that was he by no means said that running was bad. What he said was that the athletic population tends to dismiss that they could have anything wrong with their current health because they're active and they take care of themselves. So they tended to not get their lipids checked. They tended to ignore any blood pressure changes. And so it set themselves up for missing more proactive measures of health. And so I always like to kind of bring this up and ask them, and then especially like iron panels, since that's what carries our oxygen to our muscle, being able to look at that. So that's kind of where I go with this current health panel. Obviously, you can see you can spend a lot of time on this, but it really gives you that insight. And it also helps you as a dietitian, because you can then get some themes for what you need to do for your monitoring and evaluating for other sessions moving forward.
Yeah, and we had two questions come in. They're more functional to the tool, so I'll just communicate about those. This is not the whole scope. I just Xeroxed, or I'm showing at least one page here. So we also have additional things under the lab part, but it's not to exclude with vitamin D something like vitamin K, and we actually talk about that. Becca was just talking about bone health. We talk about that in the recommendations. And then to the person that asked about the LPA, LP(a) is a marker that's really important. Some people have called it the widowmaker. It's an important marker to know about, where somebody may be on cholesterol medication. They may have a family history of heart disease or not, even though your LP, so it's a lipoprotein (a). It is we see it primarily genetic, although we're also seeing that there's environmental elevation, and that is one where the individual may not be responsive to typical, is very unlikely to be responsive to typical cholesterol optimization protocols. And so unfortunately, what can end up happening there is the premature heart attack or having a stroke. So we have a lipoprotein (a) guide. I did some work with Dr. Miles Spar on it, and also around the time of Bob Harper's heart attack, we also interviewed, there's a lot of work that Anahad O'Connor did from the New York Times. So if you're curious in learning about more of that, that comes in your shop of tools, and it's also something that, in my opinion, you really should just get it tested once with, I think all athletes, there's a benefit to getting it tested. It is an add-on test, so obviously if resources are limited, that's not going to be the case. But the good part is that if it's healthy, you don't have to keep retesting. So it's not something we do frequently, but that is why that's included in there. Okay, keep the questions coming. Go ahead, Becca. I heard you were going to say something.
Great point, Ashley. And that really kind of then planted a seed for, as we get this bigger picture, like for example, those with eating disorders actually can tend to have higher cholesterol levels when they're in that malnourished state. So that helps you start to understand, like, okay, I don't want to address them for high cholesterol when it could be the fact that it's malnourishment, and then encourage them to go back to their primary care doc. I've had clients be sent to me for that reason, and then when I take a look at their full history, I realize that it's a fact of their body being starved. So great point that sometimes we have to look at all the factors together and what their genetic background, current state is, and then obviously their athletic history.
Awesome. Okay, and so we'll keep moving. So the next area, so I've got a couple of different slides here. We want to talk about, is their current total nutrition better? So as we were getting on here today, I was talking about, one of the reasons that, actually the driving reason that I created the Better Nutrition Program is I just wanted I wanted an easy and efficient way for all of us to assess total nutrition, not just looking at labs and recommending a supplement, not just looking at foods and saying we're only going to accomplish it in foods. 70, 80% of Americans are taking a supplement. You can probably accomplish a lot in food. It just is a question of if somebody can meet those food needs and chooses to meet those food needs consistently. But of course, we need to understand, first, we need to do the job of understanding what the body needs, what the body signals are telling us, and then we can start to do some of the assessment work that helps us understand what form is going to be better for them, or what forms that they're currently getting it in may be contributing to why we're seeing either certain lab values not trending in a positive direction for that individual, or not getting not having the health outcomes, whether sleep or stress or some of the other pieces. So Becca, I thought where we would start here is just talking a little bit about, we've got kind of 3 different areas in total nutrition. We've got your food, the forms of the food. We've got supplements, which would also be, the forms of the supplements. And of course, in athletics, there's a specific component to that. And then we'll dive into the recovery piece. So let's start off just talking a little bit about, once you are able to review their food journal and you're working in that macro part, it was really important for us to identify what's the form of food that they're taking it in, to help understand both how we can make better recommendations from a total nutrition standpoint, and also what those recommendations, what's currently going on. So if you want to walk through a little, we have things like with their carbohydrates, it's important to know, are they highly processed or high in added sugar, getting in fortified nutrients. In the space of protein, we're asking about, are there bars? Where are they getting their protein from? Fat, same thing. And then we ask about, are they meeting their daily needs for certain nutrients, including a rainbow of nutrition. So what was your thought process through there, and how do you find that useful in your working with your clients?
Sure. So first off, we always assess, are they getting in enough total energy? Then we kind of go back through with that fine comb and start looking at, are they having enough variety? Are they really repetitive in what they eat? I find that especially athletes are so much on the go. They're very high performing individuals. So they tend to rely on a lot of convenience foods. And so we want to make sure that they're getting enough of their nutrients. Are there any particular situations, like, again, vegetarian or vegan, that they may need more, of iron or protein? Is their diet accommodating for that? Then I have to make sure that they are responsible for the food. So if they're younger, it may be that the parents are. And so it could be that, mom is having to do, I call it like carpool dining, where they're having to drive from practice to practice, and it's whatever they can grab. Maybe it's educating mom on some quick crock pot recipes that are going to give their athletes what they need, but also not add more additional stress. Looking at if they're eating in a particular way, example, like gluten-free, are they getting enough fiber? There's been some link with iron deficiency with gluten-free, especially gluten-free, more like convenience products, not so much using those more ancient grains. So making sure that they have enough that matches up with that, and then just really get an idea of what their comfort level is with food preparation, and then budget. So, Division I student athletes, they have training tables that they can get to. We go from there, and a lot of those athletes don't have the budget to get in the calories and energy that they need. So we may have to use some of these lesser nutritional products to be able to make sure they get enough energy. And so teaching them some tricks and trades around those as well. Then when we go to, do you want me to go to the next one, looking at kind of recovery assessment and the supplements, Ashley?
I'm going to do a link between, it's actually something I encountered pretty recently with a client, and it was surprising to me. So I'm going to do a link. Actually, I'm going to move us to from the food sources, quote unquote food, over to supplements. But I had 2 clients recently that we had to go back and do heavy metal assessments because they were using protein powder and protein bars that had powder in them 2 and 3 times a day. To your point of like that packaged food, it was, hey, here's how I'm trying to meet my protein needs and do it pretty efficiently. But we were, in one of them, we did see elevated lead levels, and in the other, we ended up doing some glyphosate residue testing and some other stuff, and I'm still waiting to find out more. So I think one of the things that, I think you bring up a really great point, and I'd love to talk about how supplements can be super helpful, as you were just saying, in terms of they may be needed, but there's also a lot of risk associated. So I'd love to have you kind of move into the supplement conversation there.
And a great point to that too, that I think sometimes they think more is better, right? So I had, I can remember this one individual that had high performing strength training, and he was coming to me just kind of an overview of his basic needs. And when he talked about, I tried not to skip over. So that's another thing too. They may say like, oh, I have my protein shake with my protein powder. Always go back and ask them specifically what they're using, and this will tie into the supplements as well, and how much. This individual was actually doing like 3 to 4 scoops of his protein powder in his shake, and then the mix itself had additional protein. So in that drink, I think he had almost like 130 grams of protein. So then I asked him, I'm like, well, what's your hydration like? What does your urine look like? And he was sitting at a wood desk, and I'll never forget it. He kind of tapped, oh, about like this. I was like, oh my gosh, okay, we've got some work to do. So that kind of brings up to supplements is, first off, if they are in any kind of athletic, like high school, college, I tell them, please make sure you take it to your athletic trainer. So that way it's on the record. It's been checked if it's NSF safe, because right now they're not currently testing in all high schools, but it is on the radar that our high school athletes are now going to start being tested for doping. So trying to train them to already look for safe supplements. Then we go back and I ask them, okay, what are you taking this supplement for? So magnesium is always a great example. Magnesium has lots of good benefits, but there's a multitude of different ways that it's used. So I want to hear their reasoning why. And then are they even taking an evidence-based dosing that goes along with that? So again, like omega-3s. In performance, it could be used for concussion recovery. It could be used for inflammation and recovery. It could be used for maximizing like mitochondria in aerobic or altitude sickness. So you really kind of digging in there. And then lastly, ask them, are they even receiving benefit from it? I'll have some that come in with such a list of supplements that really probably are doing nothing except making expensive urine for them. So then we kind of go from there and have them slowly start taking it off. And for my younger athletes, I always say we have to build a foundation first. We don't want to put a Band-Aid on a gushing wound. We want to make sure that we're nutritionally doing what we need to do. Your training is doing what it needs to do. Then we can see if we can get benefits from the supplement.
Yeah, I think it's so important, and it's a huge opportunity. One of the things, as I was promoting this webinar, I was I've talked to so many of you individually and also connecting on, is this is just a massive, massive opportunity area for our businesses. And again, when you really think about who do we define as the athlete, throughout their life stages, there's going to be this value in being able to talk to doctors and coaches and other practitioners that this is an area that you do total nutrition assessment in. So I think that that is for any of you who are looking to grow your business, and maybe we're a little bit nervous about even getting into this space, being able to ask these questions and then direct the conversation. You know, my goal is really to have you be that quarterback, and, you know, be able to do that, especially in the supplement space. Now, on the flip side, I think there's a tremendous amount of value for supplements often where you can help get in nutrients that they're not getting in their day. You know, so we see these things of like potassium or magnesium or calcium. When you're assessing, you know, if somebody's just not able to get wild salmon in, or they don't like hemp seeds or walnuts, or it's just not happening, we can figure out ways to get those in. And there's a big difference between quality supplements and a lot of the nutrients that you find fortified into more refined food products that are overall not going to be as nutritious for the body. So I also think that, you know, we don't want to be afraid of the supplements. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Becca, I'd love to, we're going to go into a case study in a moment, but I'd love to talk about recovery assessment, because I think this is something that I just found so important to include in here. Kind of, I guess it technically falls under what's the body trying to tell you, so I probably could have had us talk about it a moment ago, but how do you look at recovery assessment as part of this overall total nutrition assessment?
Sure. So what's been great as we advanced in more science is we've got training periodization, and what that means is that there's certain times in a training program that they're going to be pushed beyond what that body's capable of, and because you're trying to get an adaptation. Nutrition should maximize that as well. So then you want to see, like, are they able to recover? Do we need to do things specifically with nutrition? Like maybe they need to hydrate more, or again, a lot of my endurance athletes tend to struggle with gastrointestinal issues. And so maybe they have trouble with eating for 2 to 3 days afterwards. So can we maximize their gut health to help with that? Do they need more sleep? So you help them see that the recovery actually can tend to almost be more important than what they get out of the training in itself, because to be able to improve that training, we have to recover quicker. And then letting them know that, you know, being sore afterwards, for example, we'll tie supplements in with this. Everybody thinks, okay, a multivitamin is great, and so that's going to help them recover. They go ahead and take kind of these supplements, but what they found is that actually kind of pseudo feeds the body those nutrients and hinders its ability to learn how to recover and adapt on its own. And so it actually long-term disrupts the recovery process. Now, if they're not able to get in enough fruits and vegetables and do what they need to do recovery-wise, then a multivitamin would be suitable. But for the most part, you don't want to just throw out those blanket recommendations. You want them to try to get it from foods first.
I love that too, because I think that's why we include the rainbow part in there, just because there's no, you know, virtually none of the scientific evidence will consistently say that the nutrient, and then of course we know you want the phytonutrient in there to be able to be doing the cleanup work, you know, is going to be better than, you know, so getting it in an isolated form as opposed to getting it in the food form. So I think that combination is so critical. Great. So I just want to alert everybody, the third slide, the third part of the slide, what does the assessment tell you? You're going to get, as part of the athlete assessment, recommendations and the tool, the way that Becca categorizes these. And we also have some hyperlinks there to additional resources that she has on her site, as well as some of the components coming from her book. So I included that part in there. So Becca, I wanted to bring us now to a page, just in terms of what's up on the screen, we have a variety of different tools that we believe really it works better for the practitioner to be assessing all of this, but the athlete is, you know, for example, your intake form, and as we talked about, it's something that you can use in conjunction with the coaches and with the other practitioners. But when we were talking about in just most recently on getting in those nutrients, you'll see that we say things like, are they meeting their daily needs with potassium and iron and magnesium? We have those individual tools to help you, because those are things that labs are not going to tell you. They're going, if you get a lab drawn on magnesium, I was just having a friendly argument or debate with someone at Fancy on this, where they're like, oh, we test blood levels of micronutrients. Sorry, I don't know why it keeps moving. I said, that's great. It's going to tell me about 1% of their magnesium. I want to know, cellular throughout the body, are we getting enough of that in? And so that's where we have these complementary tools to do that, or to do the water evaluation. And I thought, Becca, we could use this opportunity now to start with a case study, and then just to our audience, we've got about 15 minutes for Q&A. So while Becca walks us through a case study and we talk a little bit about it, about that individual, then we can also address your questions. So Becca, I had two in mind. Do you want to start? Did you have an athlete or a story that you wanted to take us through, or did you want me to start with a question on that part?
Oh, you can start with the question, and then I'll kind of just add in accordingly.
Great. So, and she knows this, because I ended up referring her to a family member of mine, and I was like, okay, we've got to figure this out. And on the ballet side, I think it's so, obviously there's multiple different things to be addressing. I mentioned we're gonna have a conversation with Heidi Skolnick specifically on bone health. You brought that up. A lot of concern in terms of, are we building enough nutrition in those first 20 years, and then what's happening later? A lot of confusion around calcium. But what we also see in the ballet space is also just, body image questions, and then, questions of, you want to be a really strong athlete, and you want to nurture your athletic body in terms of the protein in particular and these kinds of things, but also there may be other factors. So I actually referred a case to Becca and said, and actually I want to say, like, straight out, I was convinced without doing any assessment that the issue was going to be either under eating or restrictive eating, and it was going to be more about body, how do I get comfortable with my body? And Becca, maybe you can walk through what you identified in the assessment there pretty early on. It kind of goes along with that guy you looked at the table in terms of his urine, but starting out how you assess the 13-year-old, and we'll go from there, 12-year-old, yeah.
Sure. So as she spoke to it, I really try to, especially with our adolescent clients, get them as comfortable as possible. And I want to see kind of the world through their eyes. So I look at, what is the environment around food for them? What is it like for them at school? What's it like for them in their sport? So I think she's bringing up where I try to gently ask her about, like, well, what's the culture like at your dance studio? And, I've worked with a lot of dancers, and I know some, the girls are really funny about how they feel, and or they feel like they have to look a certain way. So that way I'm trying to approach how she feels about body image, and if there's been any set rules. So that kind of goes back to that coach. Like, are there impressions that have been made upon that athlete that they need to eat a certain way, look a certain way, perform a certain way? And I have to tread carefully, because remember, that that coach is gonna mean a lot to that athlete. Then we kind of go from there, and I want to get a sense of, what do they feel like is the main problem? If a parent has encouraged, or a family member is encouraged, what do they feel, without it being overstepping their independence, and then going from there. So in her, with visiting, I think a lot of it was just busy schedules. They get off school, then it's not quite dinner time, or maybe you're having to make it an early dinner. Then you're trying to strategize when you're going to do, like, your pre-nutrition for your training and your post, and then are they getting enough adequate hydration? So I think this is just a matter of lack of knowledge, and then being able to explain some of those health and physical symptoms that she probably at a younger age, and not even just younger age, even our older clients, had not realized were related to her hydration, and then coming up with simple strategies to implement, and then have her be able to see the outcome, so that way she feels like it's working and paid off. So that was kind of what led me with her, and the biggest things that stood out, just like that gentleman, when he could actually hear that excessive dose of protein was impacting his kidneys and hydration, then he was able to go like, oh, maybe that's what I need to change first, and then I'll work on some of these other goals down the line.
That's awesome. And I think one of the things that also I felt can come up is mom or coach, as you're talking about, can also say, well, you know, they might be really active at their sport for an hour or whatever, but then they're not very active the rest of the time, right? Or what can happen is either in off season, or what we were talking about on the ballet part is, you know, this next month, if you're getting ready for Nutcracker, it's like, oh, there's a lot of like show up and get dressed up, but you're not actually doing as much activity as you were. And there is a concern in that part that the amount that you were eating before to fuel a higher amount of athletic activity, it needs to be adjusted. So how do you navigate that with, here I'm talking in a younger person where you're dealing with both, as you mentioned, the family side and the athlete, but I think it's a really good conversation to have about any athlete, which is, you know, we were talking about before how you're figuring out what their needs are, but their needs are going to be like, how do you adjust needs for recovery versus and performance, and then also what we'll call rest time, or when they're not, you know, in there doing as much of the activity.
Great. I'm glad you brought that up. So I approach things that I try to keep things as simple as possible. So I tell them, you have your foundation nutrition. So that should not change from day to day, regardless of activity. So your breakfast, your lunch, your snacks. Then we have pre and we have post performance, whatever we want to call it, training, nutrition, that can vary according to what they're doing for that day and the amount. So if somebody knows that they're going to be actively dancing for 3 hours, they probably would need a little bit more pre-nutrition, and they may need a little bit more recovery nutrition. If it's going to be that they're going to be sitting down a lot during rehearsals, well, then they may not need as much. They still want to concentrate and focus, so we need our nutrition for that. And then they may not need recovery at all if they're going to go home and eat dinner quickly. So teaching them that those are the ones that are going to have the most variance. So like for runners, for example, I'll say like, okay, if we know that this is your baseline mileage, maybe 20 to 25 miles a week, let's make sure that we add an additional 100 calories to our snacks, to our pre and post for every 10 miles that you go up each week. And I'm just throwing out kind of rough guidelines, so that lets them see what they're doing for their sport, and that they don't adjust those other meals, so we can get an idea of how the body responds. The other thing too is when I look at energy needs, I talk about what they're doing for their training, and then I really try to sort out activities of daily living. For example, I have somebody I'm working with right now, and I brought that up to her, and she's like, you know, I walk around at school and I know that this client tends to be highly anxious. I was like, well, you've got your watch on. Can you give me like your average step count? Well, at school, she was getting like 12 to 15,000 steps a day. I'm like, oh my gosh, like that is a whole nother workout, no wonder. And so having them be able to give insight, or if maybe they've been doing something like that and then maybe they're traveling a lot and they're not as active, then being able to provide the insight, like you don't need to necessarily change your day-to-day eating, but maybe we don't need as much pre and post because that other activity is shifted. Was that kind of what you're asking, Ashley?
Absolutely. And we actually we've got a couple of questions that came in. So one question is around sleep assessment. We talked about, you know, what nutrients and what the lack of sleep, but is there anything that you prefer to use for sleep assessment? I think it's, I'm getting the sense this is more on a tracking, like a tools tracking standpoint.
Great question, Ashley. That could be your next evaluation.
Which tool? Like whatever. I don't know. I can't have any of them on my body. I can't sleep if I have them on my body. So I don't know. Yeah.
So I kind of ask them like, how deep asleep? Do they wake up rested? Do they have to get up and use the restroom in the middle of the night? Are they able to go back to sleep within 15 minutes? If they have a watch, I'll have them look at how much, are they able to get into 2 deep REMs? And then how much active deep sleep are they getting? Because sometimes if it's very restless, they may not be getting enough recovery sleep. And then especially having them not count when they get into bed, it needs to actually be when they're asleep. So sometimes they'll get in bed, but they're watching TV and they really don't have an idea of when they've gone to sleep. So those are kind of the 2 realms that I have them look at. And then I tell them, like, sleep is like everything else. Like my husband can get away with a certain amount of sleep, if you want me to be happy, this is how much sleep I usually need, and it tends to be more than him. So personalizing how they function best.
Awesome. Another question that we have is, how are you handling this carb or low carb, no carb craze? So if you want a nod to, gosh, we need these nutrients, how are you getting them into your clients?
Right. So I have them reflect back. So they may short term see some performance benefit, but at some point, teaching them too that carbs aren't just about energy. They also enhance our serotonin production. They are supportive of our melatonin production, so helping us with sleep, and then pulling out the research. So for example, in our endurance events, yes, we did see that we can train the body to be more adaptive in using our body fat stores earlier when they were doing high fat, low carb. But the biggest kicker was two things. They lost their kick at the end. So they actually lost their ability to do higher intensity exercise. And they were more prone to sickness and injuries at the end of the season. So saying like, okay, you may be able to see this performance enhancement for a while, but these are the things that you may put yourself at risk at, and then kind of empowering them to make that decision.
Awesome. So I'm excited about this one. So we have a practitioner who is working with weightlifting athletes. So she's asking, how are you measuring out performance? You mentioned that everything goes downhill when they aren't fueling enough. How are you tracking that? She deals with weightlifting athletes, and I only have subjective factors for performance, like how they feel, but she's looking for objective ways to track performance and recovery.
Okay, so that's a tough question. So a lot of it is more the subjective. So if they're following a training program, I ask them like, are you progressing as expected, or what's on your training program? And are you doing it with ease? So that rate of perceived exertion, like kind of that scale there. Then we can look at some markers. I like to look, Europe tends to be more proactive with signs of overtraining and under recovering. So if they see that morning heart rate start to creep up, that usually means the body's not recovering enough, and therefore they're going to start to see detriments in their training. So if they have that heart rate data, I start to take a look at that as well. But some of it's tough. So like if we're looking at sports like basketball or soccer, that's about reaction time, that's hard to measure, but they can usually tell you in certain situations, or if they've gotten feedback from their coaches or teammates, like, gosh, you don't seem like yourself, or boy, you normally would have had that rebound, what's going on with you? That can kind of help support if you feel like they're not fueling appropriately.
Awesome. And we got one, you can choose to answer or not choose to answer. I can pop in on it if you want, but do you recommend CBD for athletes? Of course, it's a food group. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, carry on.
You're right, that's a tough one. The kicker is we have to make sure it's NSF, and I right now, and Ashley, you probably speak to this better than I can, I don't know particular brands that have NSF CBD products.
Yeah. So I would say even with hemp foods, unfortunately, because you could, both the testing may be faulty in terms of it could be testing for THC, and you could test positive for a cannabinoid that was found in a hemp plant that's not CBD and it's not THC. So there's concern there. And then agree with you on just in general, the products and being very careful. My understanding is that there are some athletes who are using a CBD isolate. So I actually don't usually recommend that. I recommend a broad spectrum or a full spectrum just for its benefits, to get the total benefits for the plant, but to try to diminish the likelihood of any, both with NSF and also just the sheer like testing outcome, you could try a CBD isolate. But what we're seeing in schools and we're seeing in the military is you want to be on record and with your physician that you are using this, and that a CBD isolate should not test for any THC, because that's actually the one space where it should be THC free. But there's always potential. So I just say proceed massively with caution. I think it is a phenomenal area for you to ensure that somebody understands if they go and get one of these fun cookies or coffees or drinks that are now on the market, they could actually be jeopardizing their blood test and their athletic opportunity, or their performance opportunities. So really important and a great space for the practitioner to get into. But I think there's a strong recommendation from both of us here to not be recommending it.
Yeah, it's super confusing because I think it was USA Triathlon that actually took a sports CBD product as a sponsor. And so it's such confusing messages to the athlete. And I think just telling them, like, your best bet is to go through this company, because if you end up testing positive and you can show them that you have this product, it's going to actually probably then go back on the company, not so much that athlete. And so their suspension, or if they're going to get fined for it, will be more on the company, not the athlete themselves.
All right, awesome. Well, I want to give everybody a minute back in their day. I feel like that's a fun gift. So enjoy it, use it well. And Becca, I'm so grateful to you. We are thrilled to have you involved and able to answer questions and help us in this development of this tool. But most importantly, I'm excited to introduce everybody to you because I find your book and the blogs that you're tackling just awesome resources for all of us. So I hope that you all will click and add Rebecca McConville or Becca McConville, depending on where you are, to your list of resources, that you can access through the Better Nutrition Program or access her directly. So thank you, Becca. Thanks to all of you who joined. And just a reminder to anyone who is watching this at a time that's better for you, if you have questions, go ahead and send them over to us, team@thebetternutritionprogram.com, and we will get them over to Becca and make sure that you get your questions answered. We hope you'll consider purchasing independently the athlete nutrition assessment. The only way to get the practitioner version is if you want to get the whole shop of tools. So you get the CBD guide and you get all these other assessments and some menus and some other things to be using. And if you have questions about that, head over to the website and connect with us so we can help you on that part. And everybody should be getting the recording tomorrow. So happy Halloween to those of us that are live, and happy first day of November. And I always think it's crazy that the day after Halloween is the first day of Diabetes Awareness Month, but it probably just explains a lot about what's going on. So a lot of stuff for us to be working with our athletes and their families on as we end out the year. So thanks everyone for joining.